Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising trilogy, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again. Each book is a compilation of features about cruisers and cruise and travel personalities from around the world. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests.
Hello, passionate cruisers. I am delighted to welcome Christine Beehler this week on the Joy of Cruising podcast. I wrote about Chris in my second cruising book, Cruising Interrupted, in a section called More Joy of Cruising, which was originally the title of the follow-up to the Joy of Cruising. Then the pandemic happened. I first encountered Chris when we became kindred spirits, so to speak. We were among a group of cruise enthusiasts interviewed by CNN.com during the pandemic for an article about interest in cruising as soon as possible. It was called Cruise Fans Explain Why They Can't Wait to Cruise Again by Francesca Street in July of 2020. All the cruisers interviewed were eager to get back on the ocean again. Well, all except yours truly. I came across as the most cautious of the bunch, in stark contrast to Chris. The article began with a depiction of Chris's cruise, which took place in March 2020 at the dawn of the pandemic on the ill-fated Princess Cruises Coral Princess, which was denied docking after the pandemic declaration and then was stricken with a COVID outbreak. That opening to the article immediately caught my attention. Then it said, Beehler returned home on April 6th. She also tested positive for coronavirus. Beehler is 72 with a partial right lung. She also suffers from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and emphysema. Most remarkable of all, the article went on to point out Chris can't wait to cruise again. I knew I would have to reach out to Chris, and she sounded like the kind of passionate cruiser I had come to love to interview. I was right. Chris has traveled extensively worldwide and particularly via cruise in the last 10 years, and she agreed to be featured in Cruising Interrupted. In the process of interviewing her, we would spend hours with Chris telling me about the ill-fated Coral Princess saga, a high seas drama that I could easily visualize on the big screen. Of course, there's a lot more to Chris's cruising career than that Coral Princess cruise. It's a pleasure to host Chris on the Joy of Cruising podcast to get some insight into both her cruise background and the drama on the high seas. Welcome, Chris, to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
Hi, Paul. It's wonderful to see you and be here again with you.
So how you doing?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm recovering from pneumonia. It's something I brought home from my last cruise.
Sorry to hear that. You seem to bring things home from cruises.
That's true.
As we will discuss.
Yeah, but it doesn't stop me. I keep going anyway.
Oh, I know that. Shared in the introduction how we met, but didn't talk about your background. So fill us in on some details. Where you're from, where you live, family, professional background, anything you want to share.
All righty. Well, I guess we'll start at the beginning. I grew up in Rhode Island and left Rhode Island when I went off to Switzerland for a year. That's a kind of a complicated story, but through friends, and I didn't know what I was going to do after high school, so ended up in Switzerland for a year, which was absolutely fabulous. From there, I went to college in Boston. So somehow got sidetracked and ended up modeling, ended up winning a national contest and went to New York City for a year, which I hated. I think
the national contest was related to modeling?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Okay.
So it interrupted my schooling. It was after my second year of college.
But why did you dislike it? It sounds like that would be an honor.
Well, that whole world of modeling and advertising and all, it's not for me. I got involved with it in Boston, where it was fun because I was in college and I could pick and choose my assignments, and it wasn't my focus. But when I got to New York and got into that whole scene, it's just not me.
It was a whole different world, huh?
It's just a whole different world. Yeah. People cannot see me right now, but as you see, I have no makeup on. I'm a very natural type of person, and
Mm-hmm.
have to put on a front all the time is just not my bag.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, after that, then all along the line, then it happened that I got married. I had kids. I moved back to Massachusetts. The kids got into school. I was able to find a job at a travel agency because travel had been such a focus for me. And I thought, well, what am I going to do that I love? And travel agency just seemed to fit. So I was a travel agent for 5 years at a local travel agency where we did mostly retail travel. And I did a lot of traveling through that agency. They were very good to me for the travel benefits, but the pay wasn't so great. And when I got divorced, I needed a bigger paycheck, so I went into a corporate travel agency, and I did that for about 25 years, working for and ended up working for a very large travel agency and
Mm-hmm.
doing corporate. Ended that career when I was 58. Since then, I've become involved with rescuing animals, many in South Carolina. North Carolina and South Carolina is really my focus.
Mm-hmm.
And we bring cats up to New Hampshire and save them from kill shelters, and that has been between cruising and the cats. It seems like that's my life right now.
Those are your passions.
They are. Yeah. My husband died last year, unfortunately. He died last summer.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Yeah, he died in June, and then I didn't travel again until November.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that travel. We are Facebook friends, and I see that you have just finished quite a journey. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, that was a fabulous itinerary. Um, it was on Norwegian. We started off in Southampton. It was an 11-day on their brand new ship called Prima, Norwegian Prima, and we started off in Southampton and then went to Belgium, Netherlands, Norway, and Iceland. And
Wow, you're not kidding. That's a wonderful itinerary.
the itinerary was fabulous. I seem to be addicted to fjords, and
Yep.
and I've been chasing fjords around the world in New Zealand and Norway, China, South America. But this itinerary I picked specifically because it went to Granger, and I'm probably saying it wrong, which had been on my bucket list for a while. I've been to other Norwegian fjords, but not to that particular one.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was everything, everything and more than I dreamed of. It was the Norwegian fjords are they're my happy place.
So before I ask about a couple of highlights of that wonderful trip, let's go back. What did you think about NCL Prima?
The ship it's a beautiful ship. It's very well appointed. Let me say that it has an awful lot of unique things. Um, Hanging chairs that couples can sit in, and beds that you can sit in a little pool, and art sculpture, and even in the walls where the walls would normally be bare, they put in fake bookcases, with fake books. It's very well appointed. However, I found a few things sort of lacking. The atrium is small, and I think I can understand what they're doing. Atriums are kind of wasted space on ships, and so I can kind of understand that they are making it smaller. However, then they would make activities happen in there, and there would be no place to sit. So,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
a beautiful ship. Norwegian is not my favorite cruise line. I will say that. Usually sail with Princess and Royal Caribbean.
My last cruise was on Norwegian. I'm curious, when you say it's not your favorite ship, is there any particular thing that stands out?
There are a lot of things, and they're little nitpicky things, really. But what they all end up in a package is, for me, it seems that they're more concerned with their bottom line than the customer's happiness.
Okay. Okay.
Well, just for instance, we missed a port, and they probably knew that we were going to miss this port when it was booked, because the ship is too big to get into the port. And this is in Iceland, and they're redoing the port in order for the bigger ships to get in there, but it's not quite, it's not done. And so they didn't let us know until about 2 weeks prior. That meant I had wasted an awful lot of time to find the perfect excursion to go on, right? At that.
Okay.
And then it meant that I had to, as you know, the 2 weeks before the trip, I'm focusing on getting the house ready, getting my, pet sitter all set up and that kind of thing. And now I have to cancel that. In addition, we were arriving at the next port, Reykjavik, 2 hours later. And so then I had to find another excursion, because the ship was now arriving at 9, and most of the Golden Circle tours leave at 8. So it wasn't just me on the cruise critic roll call and on the Facebook page. I could see a lot of people were having to scramble and not happy.
Yeah.
So while it may not have seemed like a big thing for Norwegian to cancel a port, it was a big inconvenience. And then, so other cruise lines that I've been on, when we've missed a port, will just automatically put your port charges back onto your folio without a question. And I went up to the guest services, and they said that they didn't know if I'd be getting those back. And I went back again, and I had to really advocate for getting the port charges back. It was only $10, but now it was the principle. If you take 3,000 people on that ship times $10, that was $30,000 that they were pocketing. It was little things like that.
Sure. So what were the highlights in terms of the stops?
The highlight was definitely Granger in Norway.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been to all the other ones, actually, except, there was one port in Iceland that I hadn't been to. But I've been to all of the other stops. I went with a friend. I asked her if she would like to come and so I got to see the ports through a different view, because she was so excited about it and this kind of thing. And so I redid some of the things, some of the places, but Granger was just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I had in the book that you were in, Cruising Interrupted, I also featured another individual, and I might be saying it wrong as well, but Garinger or Granger, however you say it, he declared that, and he's a heavy cruiser like you, and he declared that as the most beautiful spot that he's ever been in, and so.
Yeah, I would say so. There are some other Norwegian fjords. There's another one called in the town of Flam, Flam. That's also very beautiful too. But
so that area is definitely on my bucket list. Did you get to see the Northern Lights?
I think they're a fallacy. I think they're a joke. The Northern Lights, I think, are a fallacy. I've been to Iceland. This is my third time to Iceland, and I have not seen the Northern Lights yet. I saw them once from an airplane going to Iceland, but I've never seen them. Now, the other two times I went were the middle of winter, and it were perfect time of year to see them, but the conditions were not favorable. And this time, the beginning of September is not the ideal time to see them, and so I wasn't really expecting to, but they had been out the night before and they had been out the night after. But the night I took an excursion out there with many other people, the conditions were perfect, a clear sky. The tour operators thought that, yeah, we're going to see them. Nope.
So how many cruises have you been on since the restart?
6. No, 5.
5. So talk about a few. Well, what was your first one back?
The first one. So I wanted to get back in gently. I didn't want to go far from the U.S., so I went on the Majestic Princess from L.A. on the Mexican Riviera, December of 21, and it was. I felt that if I needed to get back to the U.S., I was going to be very close to do so. So that's why it was just a 1 week, and yeah.
So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, sounds like you were perhaps a little bit apprehensive.
I was a little bit, yes.
Yeah. Of course, I don't blame you, given your experience on the cruise that is at the center of drama on the high seas, which we'll talk about. But how was that cruise? Was it special coming back? I mean, was it emotional? Did you feel anything? Was it?
It was. You know what I loved? When I walked on the ship for the first time, there was a big sign and several crew members that say, "Welcome back. We're happy to have you back." And the welcome was just, I think I started crying.
Yeah.
You know, I felt for all these crew members who had suffered financially during that past year and a half, 2 years, whatever. And I also appreciated the not the empty ship, but I think we were at 50% capacity at that time. It was nice to have a quieter ship in many ways, but it was also, do I say spooky? It was a little odd.
Yeah. You know, I miss those sailings on the low capacity ships. I was a little late getting back. I didn't cruise until early 22. And by the time I cruised, you know, they were packing them in. So I didn't get to experience those, you know, I mean, I talked to someone who's on a ship with, you know, they had like capacity for 4,000 and there was like 900 on there. So I've heard all kinds of stories, but I didn't get to experience any of that.
Yeah. Well, were you at the point where they were still doing the COVID testing prior?
Yeah. So what were some other highlights of your post restart cruising?
Well, this last cruise really was pretty spectacular, but I was on a transatlantic this past April into May. It started off in Fort Lauderdale and ended up in Southampton. And we stopped in France and Belgium and Holland and the Azores. And that was a fun cruise because, well, I just love the transatlantics because I like all the sea days.
What's the ship?
I was on Regal Princess.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It had been a pretty active roll call on Cruise Critic, and I was sailing alone, and had made all these contacts with single women ahead of time through the roll call on Cruise Critic, and we connected. We just had a great time. The maitre d' was super willing to set aside 3 tables for the solo cruisers, and so you could come and go if you if you wanted to go have dinner with the solo cruisers that night. It just put a whole different spin on everything. It was so much fun.
You went on what, two Princess cruises? And the last one was was
Rudy
NCL. What else do you go on?
So I went on another Princess that was a California coast. Oh, and the other one was an RCL Royal Caribbean that went from Baltimore down to just went to the Bahamas.
Was that the one from Baltimore? Was that the Legend?
It was Enchantment.
Okay.
Enchantment, and I'm going out of Baltimore this Thanksgiving on Vision of the Seas.
So you really like Princess? I've been cruising 30 years. Kind of sheepish to point out, I've never cruised on Princess, but I'm finally booked. So no time soon, not until 2025.
Whoa.
But it's on their brand new Princess Sun or Sun
right.
Princess.
I'm booked on that. I'm booked on that for next August.
Okay.
It looks like a great ship.
Yeah. I can't. I know 25 is a long time away, but I've got some couple of big cruises in 24, so I had to wait.
Super. Can you tell me what you're doing in 24?
Oh, so 24. Well, right before 24, I'm going at the end of 23. I'm going on a Christmas cruise with my daughters, my extended family. Really excited about that. That's on MSC. We've never been on MSC. In 24, two really big cruises. My first one, it will be my first transatlantic. That's on Virgin Voyages.
On Virgin, okay.
Yeah, and it starts with 8 sea days. So, Chris, I plan to gain 8 pounds because Virgin is known for their food and it's all included, and I'm trying everything.
I'll be sure to go walk on the track and.
Oh yeah. I'm back to my 18-year-old self, where I used to say buffets are going to lose money on me. so I mean, I know they don't have buffets on Virgin, but just eating all I can eat with 8 sea days. We went on a cruise recently, and it started with 6 sea days. So we likewise.
What was that one? That wasn't a transatlantic?
No, but it was very special. It was NCL from Hawaii to Alaska.
Oh, lovely.
And I say it started with 6 sea days. It didn't start with 6. We did Hawaii first, and then from Hawaii up to Alaska was 6 sea days.
Wow, lovely.
So that's what I'm doing in April, the transatlantic. And then in August, another first. At my age, you got to start checking off everything on your bucket list.
I hear you. I'm 75 and I'm doing the same thing.
Yep. So the one I'm doing in August is my first time on a river cruise. So it's a river cruise in France, and then it culminates with 3 days in Paris to do like a city, actually a Black History tour of Paris.
Ooh. Oh, how fascinating!
Because Paris has a rich history. Scholars and performers and others who moved to Paris, from the U.S. And so we're gonna visit some museums and homes and see some performances.
What line is that with?
Ama Waterways, Ama Christina.
I love Ama Waterways. I've been on 2 of theirs.
Okay, so we'll talk about it offline, because this is supposed to be your time, but I'm sure interested. I'm sure.
I just love to hear other people's stories too. I gain a lot of information about what to do.
Yeah, I'm sure interested in hearing your impressions of Ama. So anyway, that's my 24. And I'd like to squeeze in one more. My wife doesn't know it yet, so she'll know it when she hears this podcast. so I'm going to see if I can squeeze in one more in 24, and then in 25 we do the Sun Princess. So let's go back. Let's go way back. Talk about your first cruise.
Wow, that is way back. That was was in 1981. It was Royal Caribbean and Song of Norway. So I went with my husband and the two kids, and we were packed into an inside cabin, and and I loved it. I loved everything about it. Unfortunately, the family wasn't. My son was seasick, and that affected his whole good times, of course. My daughter liked it. My husband didn't. So I didn't do anything for about 5 more years. And then I went on a carnival. Yeah, kind of put it aside. It didn't click.
So those early cruises, you weren't hooked right away.
I wasn't hooked. No. And I think when I got hooked was I was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2006 and 06. And I thought, what do I want to do if this is the end? What do I want to do before I go? And an Alaskan cruise had been on my bucket list. So my husband he didn't like cruising, but he couldn't say no to that request. And so that is when I got hooked, was an Alaskan cruise. Finally took it. I couldn't take it for a few years. So it was a few years after that I went on it. And I think it was in 2014. I had incidents go on, between my health and my mother passed away, and settling her estate and her house and everything like that. But once 2014 hit and I went on the cruise, I was hooked.
What ship was that?
I think it was Coral. Oh, yes, my infamous one.
So Coral Princess has a special place in your life for a couple of reasons. Positive.
I hadn't even made the connection, Paul.
Positive
right.
And not so positive.
Yeah, but even though it wasn't so positive, the one that we'll talk about, it was. I mean, I think the cruise line handled they were very tender to us and very considerate. So there were a lot of positive things.
So that Alaska trip in 2014, that did the trick. So talk about it.
Well, of course, Alaska's beautiful. I don't know what it was that clicked, why I became immediately addicted. But somebody said, well, if you like this, you could go on to, after Alaska, we tend to go to the Panama Canal. It seems to be the way that the people that I was talking to went. And so that set up the next cruise. My husband, I figured he would put up with that because of the engineering marvel of the Panama Canal.
Sure.
And so I figured, well, I can get him on it because of that. Went on the Panama Canal, which has a fabulous itinerary. I think all the cruise lines that do it just they stop at great places. The itinerary, and of course the Panama Canal itself is quite amazing and quite a engineering feat. And I figured I can get him onto the Suez Canal, which was one of my highlights. I loved that starting in Dubai and ending up in Venice, going up the Red Sea. And
have you been back to Alaska since then?
Yeah, I've done.
Oh, okay.
I've done one more. I had a friend who was asking me about it, and she was going to go alone. I said, "Do you want some company?" And she said, "Yeah, I love it." So she and I went. We spent a. So one thing that I would always recommend with Alaska is to do a land tour as well. Spend a few days seeing Denali National Park. And I prefer doing the land prior to the cruise. After a cruise, I like to just go home.
Yeah, I've heard that. And we will definitely, this trip that I just mentioned was our first to Alaska. We will definitely be back. And I think I'm going to take your advice about doing Denali first. So, Chris, take us through what I call the drama on the high seas.
The Coral Princess in March of 2020. So there had been discussion about whether to take this cruise or not amongst some of my friends. And at that time, the virus was mostly in Asia and Italy, and there were a few cases on the West Coast. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to be fine." And I think there were when I got to Logan Airport, nobody had masks on. Everything was quite relaxed. We had heard that there was one case in all of South America, and that was a doctor who had just returned from Italy. In the time it took to fly from Boston to Santiago, Chile, there were many more cases, and we were greeted at the airport with people in hazmat suits.
Wow. Now, Chris, let me back you up. Tell us the itinerary. Where were you headed when you went to Santiago?
Okay, yeah, we started off in Santiago, and I was actually on a back-to-back, which was going down underneath Cape Horn and coming up the east side of South America and eventually going to Florida. That was a 32-day.
Okay.
And most people were doing a 14-day starting off in Santiago, going underneath the Horn and ending in Buenos Aires.
Okay.
That's what most people on the ship had planned. And then we were going to pick up a new set of people in Buenos Aires and go up to Florida.
Okay.
The first week, well, first of all, so this was March 5th that we boarded the ship, and they were checking our passports to see if we had been to some countries in Asia or Italy. They took our temperature, and that was it. And they let us onto the ship.
So at the airport, kind of, from what I understand from you, looked a little ominous because people had on hazmat suits.
Yeah.
But then when you boarded the ship, pretty normal.
Then it seemed like when we got to the cruise port, it was back to normal again. And I think that I did have some concerns at that point because of what I had seen at the airport. But then I brushed those aside, saying, well, they're just taking precautions so that nobody comes into the country. They were taking our temperatures at the airport. That, well, okay, so they're making sure nobody's coming in from these countries that have the virus. So we're safe. And I recall at one of the ports, I had this little hand sanitizer attached to my pocketbook, and one of the women in a shop, one of the shopkeeper was making fun of me with my little hand sanitizer, and she was speaking Spanish. I didn't understand what she was saying, but I could tell that she was making fun of do I think the virus is going to come here? So the first week was really quite relaxing, and the virus was pretty much out of our minds, and it was a beautiful cruise. We went from Santiago into Chile, the fjords, so the glaciers, went down to Ushuaia, which is they call it the end of the world, at the bottom of South America.
Yeah, I've got some great photos of you in Ushuaia. I'm probably saying it wrong. I think I included them in the book, and with the penguins and all of that, and we'll see a lot of those because I will be promoting this episode. So
the penguins actually were in Falklands. They weren't in Ushuaia.
Okay.
And I think that our main concern then on the ship was, are we going to be able to get through get into the Falklands, and are we going to be able to, the waters are very rough as you go underneath, as you go around Cape Horn. So we were mostly concerned, I think everybody I was talking to, we were focused on the cruise itself. We were hearing some stories about back home, but it wasn't a concern really to me, because I figured this was just something that was happening in other countries at that point, Italy and Asia. The first week was just beautiful. The scenery in Chile and Argentina was just fabulous. The people were amazing. And on the 12th of March, so we left on the 5th, so just a week into it, we were cruising around Cape Horn. It wasn't as rough. We were being very, very lucky with the weather. It was cold and all, but the captain came on and said, I want you to turn on your TVs, listening to an announcement from the president of Princess Cruises. That's when we heard cruising was being stopped. A couple of other cruises lines had stopped, but I think Princess was one of the first ones. And then quickly everybody else did. So the announcement from Jan Schwartz said that we were to find the closest port and go home, basically, that the cruising had ended. I don't know as we knew at that point what the closest port was that we were going to be able to get off or not. But my focus then was the next day, Friday the 13th, we were doing to the Falkland Islands, and were we going to be able to make it? Because I wanted to see those penguins. So we did make it in to see the penguins. And Falkland Islands was amazing. Got back onto the ship, and the captain announced we were going to miss the next port. We weren't going to be allowed to go in there, but we were headed right off to Montevideo in Uruguay to get off the ship. That cruising had ended. Buy a ticket, because that's how you buy an airline ticket, because that's how you're going to be able to get off the ship. You had to have an airline ticket, and those people who had bought the air through the cruise line were being taken care of through their department. I bought the ticket, didn't make it into that port. We were then headed to Buenos Aires. The captain announced that we weren't being allowed into Montevideo. We're going to Buenos Aires and buy an airline ticket in order to get off the ship. So I bought another airline ticket. I think at this point I had about $5,000 worth of airline tickets, because of course they were last minute tickets, and people, you were at everybody's mercy. They were last minute, and everybody wanted the tickets. So then we pulled into Buenos Aires, and we were told that because we had been on the ship 13 days, that we were going to spend the night in Buenos Aires and do the 14-day quarantine to show that we were fine, that the ship had been under quarantine for 14 days and nobody was sick, and were allowed off. Those who were Argentine, I believe it was just those who were Argentine nationals were allowed off at the beginning. Then we were being called according to our airline. If you're on such and such an airline flight number, then you can get off. We had immigration officials on board in the wedding chapel. Anyway, my flight would have already left, and I hadn't heard my flight called. So I said, well, I'll wait till the next day. The captain had said, we're just going to wait here until everybody gets off. I just went up to the pool and was relaxing, and other people were standing in line, anxious to get off the ship. And I had met some solo cruises, and they were three of them from England. They were just great fun and great sense of humor. So we went to dinner that night, and we were just having a good time at dinner, and noticed that the buses were coming back from the airport. And I said, well, and people were getting off the buses and coming onto the ship, and we couldn't quite figure out what was going on there. Then the captain announced, instead of spending however long it was in Buenos Aires for everybody to get off, Buenos Aires or Argentina was closing their borders, and we had to get out before midnight or we were going to be stuck there. And we weren't going to have any supplies. So the captain had called back everybody who was waiting at the airport to get back onto the ship. And we took off and got out of there before they closed the borders.
Now, I suspect, Chris, at this point, especially those passengers who were on buses that went to the airport and came back, people have to be pretty anxious at this point, right? I mean, that sounds like a mess.
Oh, it was a mess. Yet at the same time, I don't know what I would have done had I been the captain, or I imagine all the calls were being made from corporate, all the decisions. We couldn't abandon those people there because,
right.
When many of them had flights at 1 a.m. or sometime after midnight, the planes weren't going to be flying. The borders were closing at midnight. So those people would have been stuck. So they had to get them back.
Did
I mean,
everyone came back? I mean, were there any passengers who just
some,
refused to believe they could not get on a plane?
no, not that I know of. There were some who got out.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So the ship holds, I don't know, let me say 3,000. It's 3,000 plus. And about 1,000 people, including the Argentine nationals, got out.
Oh, okay.
The immigration people seem to be calling according to some kind of a plan. The Swiss had been in touch with the Swiss embassy, and they had a plane waiting for them. So they were allowed to get off. The Canadians there was an Air Canada plane that was being held for, an airplane full of Canadians. They were all taken off. It seemed like the Americans and the British were not. And so I don't know if that had anything to do with the fact that the Argentina is still angry that the Falklands went to the British. I know there is still a lot of hard feelings there. I don't know if that played a part in it or not. So we were left with, I don't know, 2,000, 1,500 people or something like that when we pulled out of Buenos Aires.
So when you pulled out of Buenos Aires, did you know where you were headed?
No. Every day was a mystery. And I think that then we were told that we were headed down to Montevideo again, and buy another ticket. And at this point, I was up to about $7,000 worth of airline tickets. And it became clear pretty quickly that we weren't going to be allowed off. However, they were putting supplies on, which I didn't realize. None of us really realized how low we had been on food, because they were putting supplies on in Buenos Aires because we were supposed to end there. So they didn't bother putting on supplies or getting extra fuel at the time. They were just taking care of the basics. And so we pulled out of Montevideo and didn't know where we were going. And then maybe the next day or so, the captain said, we're going to, Rio de Janeiro has allowed us in, so we're going in there. Buy a ticket. By this time, I said, no, I'm not buying any more tickets. He had also announced that we were going back to Florida, which is where I was supposed to go anyway. Most of the people were not. So we got outside Rio and sat there outside in the waters, in the international waters, for an awful long time. And the pilot was not coming out to bring us in. And a ship cannot go in to the ports without a local pilot. Eventually, well, we had a great view of Christ the Redeemer, the big statue up on the top of the mountain.
Uh-huh.
We were focusing on that, and then the captain announced after a few hours that they weren't going to let us in their waters. So
Wow.
That's when we pulled out to heading for Florida. He said, we're just heading for Florida now. And that's when I was out in the back of the ship. And I was just watching Rio de Janeiro leave in the background. And I was alone there on the outside deck. And this man came out through the door, and he was so upset. He was pounding his chest and he's saying, Mia Rio. And that was his home. And now he was being denied the chance to go home, and he was headed to Florida. And so many of these people, they didn't have the visas necessary to go to Florida or to go to the States, or and everybody was planning on being home. And this poor man, just so close to his home, and I just left him alone. And then I looked through the porthole door as I left, and he had dropped down to his knees, just sobbing that his country wouldn't let him in.
Let me jump in, listeners. At this point, correct me if I get anything wrong, Chris. Chris took the most poignant photo that was in Cruising Interrupted, and there's over 100 photos in Cruising Interrupted, but this one was it was chilling. Do you know, Chris, whatever happened with that gentleman?
I saw him on board a few times, and he was always sad. I don't know what happened in the end, although I hear that after the rest of us got off in Florida, there were a few nationals. By this time, they had to get us on charter planes. So I heard that the South Americans were one of the last ones to get out. Mm-hmm. Whether it was because there were only a few of them that were going, and or because the countries were not willing to let planes in, I don't know. Everyone eventually got home.
On the way to Florida, I understand there were some incidents, some highlights. Talk about those.
Yeah, I don't suppose you're talking about the crossing the equator ceremony, but when we crossed the equator, it was a big ceremony, and the captain came dressed out as Neptune, or maybe I don't know if he was dressed as, or if another crew member was, and we were all just having a great time. It was later that day that I started feeling a little off, and the next morning, I went to have breakfast with somebody, or I went to have breakfast, and I saw some friends, and they said, "Come sit with us." And I said, "No, I don't think I will. I think I'll just sit over here on the side because I think I'm coming down with a cold." And it was later that day that the captain said, "People have been showing up at the sick bay, and if you have any respiratory symptoms, please come down. There'll be no charge." And perhaps 2 hours later, he said, "Unfortunately, we have to have everybody go into your cabins for quarantine. That too many people had shown up, and this was becoming quite an incident." At that time, they didn't know what was going on, but shortly after, I think that like the next day, we pulled into Barbados, supposedly for supplies. And as it turned out, they dropped off some COVID samples. And we do know that one passenger was taken off, and we were not given any clues why he was taken off, but later found out that he had then been airlifted to Fort Lauderdale and did pass away from COVID. And we didn't know the COVID samples had been dropped off. We were in quarantine. We really didn't know what was going on. When the captain came on, whenever that was, a day or two later, and said that there is COVID on board, that the samples were positive, it put a whole different spin on things, because we had been so isolated really on the ship and thought we were a healthy ship, and we were the only people healthy in the world, and we were just cruising around. And I said, and so many of us said, just keep us on the ship for another 2 weeks until it blows over. And the captain came on daily saying, if you have any symptoms, call this number. There's no charge. And he was keeping us apprised with that kind of thing. And that we were to stay in our cabins until further notice. And I don't know if I ever had hope that we were going to get out, or if we were just going to stay in there. It was also so mystery. It was really a question of living in the moment, because we didn't know what was going on. I kudos to the people who had to make all these decisions under the stress they were facing at home too.
Now, I understand that as you approached Florida, you began to make contact with media. Talk about that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how that happened. Somebody, I think from England, had been contacted by media, and she didn't want to do anything. And so I had been on a WhatsApp conversation with a lot of the people, on the ship. And so she said, does anybody else want to do it? And I said, I'll talk to them. And that was Francesca Street, who it's through her that you and I met. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to know what was going on. And then I think must have been through her that NBC, the local NBC station in Miami, became involved. And I was actually sending off videos, or true videos, and also voice videos of captain off to the media. Mm-hmm. I sort of regret doing the captain's thing, but now in retrospect, because I think that was really kind of private information, but I did anyway. I did. we didn't know what was going on. And I also wasn't in a very good frame of mind because I wasn't feeling well.
Right, right. So you didn't know what was going to happen in the very near future.
No, we got out. Well, I think we were about 2 days ahead of or behind. Holland America had a couple of ships coming into Fort Lauderdale that we knew that one of them had sick passengers on board. Then we heard that Fort Lauderdale was not going to allow us in. That just didn't sit well with me. I thought about this man whose country had denied him access.
The Brazilian man.
The Brazilian man. And I said, well, I know now why he dropped down to his knees.
Yeah.
And now what? And the question of now what? And I was also angry because I figured the cruise ships they have given millions, if not billions of dollars to these ports in order to have it as their home port. And they weren't allowing us in because they didn't want to tax their medical system at that point, unaware of what was to happen. So we rendezvoused in the Bahamas with the Regal Princess, the one that I was just on the transatlantic in April. The Regal Princess was just such an emotional rendezvous because they put down one of the tenders and that had, I don't think it was the entertainment department, but they were entertaining us. They had big signs that said, "Welcome home, Coral Princess." And that in itself was just amazing because we had just experienced 2 weeks of people saying, "No, you can't come." People not wanting us. This was now 2 weeks after we had left Buenos Aires.
And didn't you say something in the book about the princess ships were kind of playing horns?
Yeah. Princess has this thing when they leave ports, they play the Love Boat theme because the Love Boat was originally one of the princess ships. So they play the Love Boat theme when they leave a port. So then they started the Regal Princess and the ship I was on, the Coral Princess, started. One would do a couple of notes and another one would do another couple of notes. And it was just very tearful. I should point out that everybody had been moved to balconies. I was in a balcony anyway, but they had, Princess was also aware now that fresh air was helpful. So they had moved all the passengers who had been on ocean view or inside over to balconies because they had all those rooms now. Cabins became available when so many left in Buenos Aires. Mm-hmm. They'd also moved up some of the crew members out of their crew quarters into those ocean view or inside cabins that were a little bit more spacious. So anyway, the Regal started playing the horns and the tenders were out there and the crew members from the Regal, because all the ships now in the world were empty except ours. I mean, I think there was one other one out there still cruising around. I think the Ruby out in Australia might have been behind us. Everybody, I think, started crying when I talked to other people. It was just so emotional to have a sister ship being so kind and welcoming after we had been stuck in our cabins now for a week and hadn't seen anybody. As it turns out, we didn't sort of not aware of the fact that another tender was bringing on medical personnel from the Regal.
Wow.
And medical supplies, and they were really loading up our ship because although we weren't aware of it, there was a lot of trouble on the ship. Mm-hmm. Down in the sick bay. And it was the next day that the captain came on and woke us up in the morning and saying, "I've got good news and I've got sad news."
Wow.
And he said, sadly, two of our passengers passed away overnight.
Oh my.
And but Miami has opened up their port to us. So we'll be pulling into Miami. As it turns out, the Princess has no berth there, but they are part of Carnival Corporation. So a Carnival ship was pulling out so that we could pull in, which the way that all the cruise lines and everybody came together to get us out of this situation was just so heartwarming, so moving. As we were pulling into the port of Miami, we were passing other ships, other large ships, other lines, and it was only crew members on board. And they were all out in their balconies welcoming us. They were yelling and clapping. And I'm just getting emotional again thinking about it. It was, I don't know what it was about it, but just to see people again and to be welcomed.
Yeah, as I listen to you, Chris, I'm picturing the whole thing. I even said to you in the process of writing the book, I said, I can picture this. I don't know that I use these words, this high seas drama on television. I mean, it just, of course, what we had is a once in a century event, but those are the kinds of events that get dramatized on television. And I can just picture all of this going on. So now you had contact again with media in Miami, right?
I did. Not so much with Francesca at CNN, a little bit with her, but NBC, the local affiliate there, was giving us an awful lot of coverage. I was sending videos off to them, and one of the reporters became quite a good friend, not only in the fact that we were talking a lot about what was going on, and he was giving me information of things that he had found out as well. I remember when I said to him, I'm afraid. And he said, you're going to be all right, Chris. It's going to be all right. He just gave me the emotional support that I needed at the moment. The helicopters were up above and trying to get filming of what was going on down below. But my balcony was right off where the ambulances met us and where they were taking people off the gangway. And I was doing a lot of recording and sending them the recordings. Mm-hmm. We had developed quite a nice relationship over a couple of days. And when it became my turn to get off, I said, well, I guess I'm going to sign off now. And he said, well, they'll be waiting for you at the airport. When we got to the airport, I looked around and we were out in the tarmac. There was nobody around. And then I noticed, I looked up and there was a helicopter there from the station. And they had showed up at the airport to film my plane taking off. Again, so emotional. I figured it was their way of saying thank you for all the information I had been giving them for the last couple of days.
I can see the emotion, and I'm sure the listeners can hear it. Didn't you wave to the helicopter? Don't I have a photo of that?
I do. That was an Associated Press photo, and that did go viral. I was just waving goodbye to the helicopter and saying thank you for coming and thank you for the support.
What a stirring drama. What was the aftermath?
Well, we all had to get on charter planes. When we got it. I'm sorry. Reliving this is still emotional after all these years.
Well, I'm sorry to get you to relive it. For the listeners, you can't see what I'm seeing. This is tough on Chris, and I appreciate her letting me share it in the book and now reliving it a couple of years later.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. The CDC had after we pulled in, we were just given one thing after another. The rules kept changing. After we pulled into the port, the CDC said that everybody has to go on chartered planes. And so then it was another question of how long are we going to be on this ship? Because, here we are right in Miami, almost home. But how long is it going to take them to get all these chartered planes? Understand now, first of all, that we've been in quarantine for a week. And I was traveling alone, so I had been alone for a week. And we were getting reports of what was going on in the world, but had not experienced what you people were experiencing. So it was presented to us all at once. I recall getting off the ship. So I was very hesitant about opening the door and walking out the cabin. I felt that the cabin had been my safe spot for all this time. Because I've had lung cancer and 2 surgeries to have parts of one lung removed, I was very concerned that if I got COVID, I would be dead. So when I took that first step outside the cabin, I just felt I was walking into my death. It was the oddest feeling. And of course, we were masked. We had been given gloves. Went through a quick physical, just checking temperatures and asking how we were doing. I had a minor temperature, but they let me off. Herzl, who was the reporter at Local, had asked me if I would do one last favor, and that would could I record what it was like leaving the ship. And I was recording it at the time, and I remember the very last crew member I saw who was just waving goodbye. And after saying goodbye to the last crew member, I had to leave the ship and walk onto that gangway, and I was very frightened. We were put into buses, and I sat every other row. I was leaving a row between the next person because we had been told on the ship, keep 6 feet away from the other person. And when the buses started rolling, by the time they started rolling, the buses were full. And yet at the same time, I don't even know how to describe my feelings. It was like I had just arrived onto a different planet. We had police escorts. The highway from the cruise port to the airport was closed down for us to pass, so that the motorcycle police were doing leapfrogging each other, and they would close an entranceway so that we could pass an entranceway onto the highway. So the highway was just get these people out of here as quickly as possible. And I thought we were just being treated like such invaders, let's say. And then we pulled into the airport, and we went to when we didn't go into the terminal at all. We were in a tarmac far away, and they had set up a TSA screening thing. And oddly enough, they were saying now, stay 6 feet away, stay 6 feet away. Well, I'll just get off this bus, or a crowded bus. And we had a chartered plane, a 737 waiting for us. And again, when I got on the plane, I thought to leave 6 feet away from the other person, but the plane was crowded, was filled. My plane was going from Miami to Cleveland to Newark to Toronto, and I was getting off in Newark in order to come to New Hampshire. But when we got to Cleveland, looked out the window, and there are all these cars rolling up onto the tarmac. They were private drivers taking people individually to their homes. This had all been arranged by Princess, and I thought, my goodness. As a travel agent, I was trying to think of the intricacies of getting this all arranged. And then at the same time, I was thinking, why are we so piranhas? Nobody wanted to be near us, and we had just been introduced to the world that you all had 2 weeks of getting used to of things shutting down and all. And we just landed into this unknown territory. And then when I got off in Newark, we were met by drivers. And my ride from Newark to New Hampshire was about 4 hours. And I was in the car alone, even though there were other people that were coming to New Hampshire. And I said to the driver, I said, do you know who we are? And he said, no, I think you all just came in from Cleveland. And I said, yes, but do you know where we came from before Cleveland? And no. And I said, well, we got off the Coral Princess. Have you heard of that? And he said, oh, yeah, that's been all over the news.
Oh, wow.
And I said, I just got off that ship. And I just felt like he was very calm. He didn't have I expected the brakes to go on for him. Pull me out of get out of this car, but not at all. But I just felt like I was so unwanted.
Yeah.
And I was entering a world that was totally unfamiliar to me.
What an amazing story, Chris. And, I'm so glad that you were willing to share it with the listeners. I'm so glad that your cruise life, which I know means so much to you, is essentially back to normal. I know it didn't feel that it ever would be that day, but thank you so much.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be with you again, Paul.
A few moments we have left. What do you have booked? Let's talk real quick about the future.
2 more in 2020. What are we in? 2023. I've got 2 more in a couple of weeks. I leave for LA to Hawaii, back to LA. 15-day. That's
what
actually
ship?
Sapphire Princess.
Okay.
And that's actually courtesy of Princess Cruises, because the credits that I had received from the Coral experience were put on this.
Oh, okay. So you're still kind of living it.
Sort of,
yeah. but in a good way. In a good way.
Yeah, Princess has been very kind to me. And then that's October, and then in November at Thanksgiving, I'm taking a Royal Caribbean again out of Baltimore, just down to the Bahamas, just to be away for Thanksgiving. My children live. My son's in California. My daughter is in Germany, and I don't really have any other family around, and so I just wanted to get away for Thanksgiving since my husband passed away.
Understood.
So that's how I'm doing that, and I may do something at Christmas as well. Have to find out what the kids are doing.
Chris, before we let you go, let's lighten the mood a little bit. A couple of light or fun cruise questions, and then perhaps an oddball question. What's your favorite cruise drink and food?
Since I don't drink alcohol, I will say that I do love the specialty coffees.
Well, I'm big into specialty coffees, and my wife is big into specialty teas.
Food-wise, I love that. I hope they're still doing it. Royal Caribbean has escargot every night.
Oh, I love escargot.
And I love escargot, and I hope that's not going to go the way of a lot of things in cutbacks.
And even escargot on NCL, I had it, but I had it in the French specialty restaurant. So,
okay.
But yeah, I love escargot.
Royal Caribbean used to give it every night.
Yeah.
And I haven't been on them for almost a year now, so I hope it's still a policy.
Anything else on the food? Are you a specialty dining person?
Since I travel alone a lot, I'm not.
Okay.
I did on a couple of cruises because people that I had met invited me to go with them. Mm-hmm. But I don't typically do that, no.
Besides the Coral Princess cruise, what is your most memorable or funny or outlandish or even embarrassing cruise or port experience?
Now you're talking all different ways. Let me start with the favorite. I have 3 favorites, and I always say that the Norwegian fjords was my very favorite. Mm-hmm. I went on a 14-day over the summer solstice, up to the Arctic Circle and through the Norwegian fjords, and that was just amazing. I think that remains my favorite. There was another one.
And again, what was the ship?
The ship was Princess. It was either the Emerald or the Crown. Okay. I think it was the Crown.
Okay.
Princess. The other super memorable trip was on the final sailing of Splendor of the Seas, Royal Caribbean. Mm-hmm. We started in Dubai and went underneath the Arabian Peninsula and 5 days up through the Red Sea, or 4 days or something up through the Red Sea, and stopped a couple of stops in Israel, a couple of stops in Greece, and ended up in Venice. And this one was in addition to the final sailing of the Splendor and watching the crew members who had become family, seeing them saying goodbye to them, their friends and everybody, the whole ship was going away. That was a super trip.
Finally, and I know that you've invited friends and family to listen. So welcome to the folks Chris has brought to the Joy of Cruising podcast. We hope you all enjoy what you hear and will come back to join us. So Chris, share one thing that my listeners and your friends and family don't know about Chris.
About me personally or something on a ship?
Anything about you.
Oh, golly. And the only person who knows about it is the person I was with on the ship. I used to get the Sunday newspaper, the Boston Globe, very thick, and I could not keep up with it. So I'd bring all these newspapers on a cruise with me, thinking that I was going to read them. Well, my water bottle opened up onto these newspapers in my carry-on. And I was with a friend who is extremely neat and tidy. When we got to the ship, we got into the cabin, I started spreading out these newspapers all over the cabin. I was hanging them from everywhere. I was going to read these papers no matter what. And we still chuckle about it today, that I would be so intent. And she had no hard feelings.
You salvaged the newspapers, all right?
I did, but I probably didn't read them. Yep. I don't know.
Chris, I recognize that you are not a cruise influencer or blogger or anything like that. You're just a passionate cruiser. And I appreciate that you took the time out of your schedule to share with listeners your cruising background and an up-close and personal perspective of a once-in-a-lifetime adventure on the ocean that one could never imagine happening. I will always hate the pandemic, but it did enable me to meet you, and I'm happy to have crossed paths. All the best to you, and thanks for being a guest on the Joy of Cruising podcast. I know you're going to be doing a lot of great cruising in the future, so I would love to have you back just to talk about cruising.
Well, thank you. I'd love to come back again because it is definitely a passion of mine, and I love to talk about cruising. I have 4 very exciting ones booked for next year. One of them is a river cruise, starting in France around the same time as the Olympics. So that should be a fun experience.
I know we'll want to get a trip report. So all the best, and as they say, I'll see you on the ocean.
Very good. I hope one day our paths do meet on a ship somewhere.
All right, so do I. Take care, Chris.
Thank you. You too, Paul.
Talk to you soon.
The Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted, each $16.99 plus shipping, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again for $18.99, can be ordered at the link on thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. The Joy of Cruising books are also available at Amazon. Order the ebook at Amazon or your favorite online retailer. Stay in touch by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or following the Joy of Cruising Podcast on Instagram. We're constantly adding new shows. Please leave a review and tell a friend about us. We hope you enjoyed this brief escape to the ocean. See you next week.